Let's create tables in the MySQL database. Log in to the Ubuntu server that's hosting the MySQL database, and then clone the GitHub repo as shown on the screen. Once that's done, navigate to the folder where you have the repo. And again, you can see the instructions on the screen. Then type the following command as you see on the screen, which will load our create table script into our telemetry schema. Once that completes, you can log into MySQL. Then use the telemetry schema. Finally, list the tables that are in that schema, and you'll see that you have 2 new tables. Begin by logging into MySQL. Next, use the telemetry schema. Once you're in there, you can use the insert statement to insert data into a table. Use the format shown on the screen. Feel free to type all of the instructions on one line. If you don't see any errors, it means that your instruction was successful. You can proceed to insert data into other tables. In this example, we're inserting data that references the new station that we just created. First, let's log into our Ubuntu server. I will do that with the following command. Be sure to use the correct IP for your server. Next, I'll log into MySQL. Next thing we need to do is make use of our schema. That's called telemetry. And then let's select all of the data from the stations table. And that's it. We've queried our data. We can also retrieve data from our readings table. There we have it. And if we want to utilize a filter, we can get all of our readings where the humidity is less than 66%. That's it. You can quit when you're done. Quit the server as well. Make sure you're logged into your Ubuntu server and then log into the MySQL server. Once in, use the telemetry schema. Next, insert some data into the stations table. Select all the data from the stations table. We can see that the data we inserted has an ID of 2. Next, use the update statement. Select the data from the stations table once again to see that the data has changed. And that's it. Thank you. Ensure that you're logged into the Ubuntu server. Next, connect to the MySQL server. You need to make use of the telemetry database. Next, read the data that is contained in the stations table using the instructions shown on the screen. Then go ahead and delete the record with an ID of 2. And finally, list the contents of the table again, and you'll see that that record has been deleted. Set up an application structure. To do that, open up your terminal. First thing we're going to do is create a directory called MyAPI. And we have the command up on the screen. Next, we need to move into that directory. Once we're in there, we can use the express generator. And we have an application structure. At the bottom of the screen, you can see instructions for installing dependencies as well as for running the app. So let's go ahead and install dependencies using npm install. And the instruction has completed successfully. We can then go ahead and let's run the app for the first time. And now we have something listening on port 3000. So I'll go ahead and drag a browser screen across, and then we can see what we have. So I've put in the local IP address, or rather localhost, which is because I'm running on a local computer. If you run this on a remote server, you'll need to put in the IP address of that server. And that's it. We have our basic application structure up. Thank you. Let's look at defining a route in our application. To start with, I have my editor open, and you can download the completed files from the GitHub repo for chapter 5. First thing that we need to do is go to our package.json, and I have that open. And there's a dependencies section, and that starts on line 8 within our package.json. And on line 15, you can see our definition for the MySQL module. It's now called MySQL 2, and we have that on line 15. Then the next thing that we need to do is open up our terminal, and I can do that from within my editor, but depending on what you're using, you might need to use an external editor. And I'll just list my files just to be sure that I'm working where my source code is, and you can see here that I'm within chapter 5 MyAPI. And then I can go ahead and run npm install. That'll take just a few seconds, depending on what you have. And what we have is our node modules are now installed and ready to work with. Now we need to go to our routes folder, that's this, and we need to work with our stations.js, and I'll open that up. If you don't have that file, you'll need to create it or just clone the GitHub repo. What we have is, on the first 3 lines, we have our include for our necessary modules. On the 3rd line, you can see where we include our MySQL. And then we need to configure a connection to the MySQL server. I will need to edit this host to point to the right location. But my credentials should be valid. You will need to edit that to use your credentials. And then the next thing we need to do, which you'll see on line 14, is declare our route using router.get. And depending on your editor, you might not see some of these decorators like path and handlers, but the code is in there. And then we need to export our module, and that's done at the bottom of the file. On line 40, you can see a module.exports router. And that's it, we've defined our route. Next, we need to go take a look at our app.js. And the first thing that we need is on line 9, which is our stations router. And that includes the stations.js file that we defined in our routes folder. So take a close look at line 9 for that definition. Next, we need line 25, which is our app.use. We have app.use/users and then app.use/stations. So take a look at lines 24 and 25. And once you have those lines in place, you're ready to run the code. And so as usual, what we need to do is npm start. And so we can go back to our terminal and type in what you see on the screen. Okay, looks like I have something else running, so I need to track that down and end it. So we can go ahead and run it again. And there we have it. Our application is now listening. And then we can browse to our new route, which is /stations. So I'll just find a browser window and share that. So with a browser window open, I will browse to localhost port 3000/stations, which is the new route that we created. Okay, I have that open in another browser. I'm using Safari, so I'll drag that across. And that's it. If you've taken a look at what we have in our database, you'll find that this corresponds to the record that we have in our stations table. That's it. Thank you. Let's implement a REST API using Python. First thing we're going to do is check our Python version. And we'll do that using python-v. And we can see that we have Python version 3.7.1. Next, we will install a virtual environment, and we'll use pip3 install virtual env. Give it a bit of time to install. Now that it's complete, we need to create a virtual environment. And we can see that it's been created. And then we need to make use of it. So we'll use source myFastAPI /bin/activate. And that's it. Next thing we need to do is install the Fast API dependency. Next, we need to install our final dependency, which is ubicorn, and we want the standard Once we've got that installed, we can go ahead and create the application structure. And to do that, we will create a folder called MyFast API. And then we need to change into that folder. And then we need to create a file called main.py. On Linux-based systems, you can do that using Touch. And now we're ready to edit that file and put some code in it. I'll do that using PyCharm, but you're free to do that using any text editor of your choice. So I'll go ahead and I'll drag my editor over from another window. First, I need to open it. So I've got my editor open, and right now you can see that the file is empty. So we've got code that we can paste in, and I'll just copy and paste that in. And you can go ahead and save this, and feel free to read through it. There isn't much going on. We just have our import of Fast API, and then we create an instance of Fast API called app, and then we define two functions, and we have decorators. This decorator ensures that this function gets executed as the root when we browse, and then this gets executed as stations when we browse. So I'll go ahead and save it, and I'll switch back to our terminal. Now we can start our application using UVCon main app. Now we can browse to port 8000 on our local machine. That's this. So I'll just copy that, and then I'll launch a browser and bring it over. And that's it. When we browse to the root, we get that. And we can also browse to stations because we've defined that. And it returns an empty array. And that's it. We have an application structure. Thank you. Let's get some data into our instance of InfluxDB. So first you need to browse to the server address where you have InfluxDB installed, and don't forget the port 8086. Okay, log in with your credentials. So the next thing that we need to do is go check whether we have a bucket, and if we do, we can use it, and if we don't, so I already have a bucket called telemetry. If you don't have that bucket, you can create it by clicking on this bucket called create bucket. Next, let's go to our Data Explorer page. And then click on the script editor. And from there, we need to paste in our script, which will fetch some data for us. So click on the submit button and wait for the data to get fetched. Okay, I think I should have created a bucket called Noah, not telemetry. So I'll go back to the buckets screen and create a bucket called NOAA to hold that. And since I'm storing locally, I'll just not bother with deleting that data, any old data. And then I'll go back to here, and now we have Noah, so I'll go ahead and submit. And once that's done, we have some data in there. Next thing we need to do is generate an API token. So click on the Generate API Token button and then click on All Access API Token. And so I'll just call this N0AA API Token. And save this. So I need to copy this token and save it somewhere so I can use it. So Right, so now we need to make an API call, and we can use Postman. So I'll drag Postman across, and so I'll minimize this and get Postman. We just need a way of sending get and post requests, and you can also use CURL if you would like to. Okay, here we have Postman. So first thing we need to do is set a HTTP method to get, and then we need our URL, and we can use this. I'll use my so that's the same URL that we used on the browser, but now I need to put in API and /v2, and then I need to go to the authorization tab, and I need to set the authorization type to API key, and make sure that the key is authorization and the value needs to be our API token. Just confirm. Okay. Okay, so that's our authorization. And then we need to go to the headers. And we need a content type header. So add a new key, content type, that's it here. And then I'll set the value to application/JSON. That's it here. And then we can go back to our body. And we need this form URL encoded. And then we need a key. We need to specify our DB and then our value. And then we need to specify a query and our value will be a query. And we can then go ahead and send this, and there we have a response, and we can see all of these details. And so we have an initial API call that we've made. So let's return to our InfluxDB console. So we're back here and we're done with this API key. Let's go back here to our query builder. So let's go back to our query builder, and if we switch to the builder, we see our from window. I should just enlarge this. So we're back in our in our query builder, and we have our from and our filter. Once again, let's switch to our script editor. And from there, let's run a flux query. So I'll just paste that in and read that out. So we specify the bucket we're reading from, which is from NOAA. And then we specify our range, which is from the last 24 hours to the last 12 hours. And we specify our filter. And our filter is the average temperature as a measurement. And then we ask for it to return it. And let's go ahead and submit that. And we don't have a result, so I will make it from the last 24 hours all the way to the next 12 hours. So our data just came in actually, so it's not that old. We see that it shows up as coming in today at 4 a.m. The time on the server is probably wrong also, I'm not sure. Okay, so using the query builder, we've been able to run a flux query. You can also do that directly with the editors. Sorry, using the editor, we've done that, but you can do that with the query builder as well. So now let's go back to Postman, and we need to change a few things in order to run this query within Postman. So let's pick up Postman again. And now we need to change our URL. So our URL should have a query, and we need to specify our org ID this time around, which I believe this is my org ID. And then we need to go back to our headers and change our our content type. I will change our content type from what we had here to vnd.flux. Okay. Content length, content type. Let's see if I can add it to the bottom. Oh, that's weird. Not that one, but this one. Okay. So let's go back to our body. Here's our request body, and change this to raw. And then we can pick up our flux query, which we have here. and we can paste that in here. And let's check our authorization and our token. Let's be sure that I have a token that will work for everything. So hold on a second. Okay, I have an all access token. I need to ensure that I have a token that is all access. So let's try this again. Yeah, actually, the token I have should work. So let's go find out why it's not working. Again, I need to pick up the entire token. So this is communicating with our server okay. Let's see. Am I allowed to post? Okay, hold on. Let's be sure I didn't skip a step. Okay, we're allowed to post and not to get, so my bad. Let's change this to post and send. What ID? I need an organization ID. Current organization. Okay, so I'll just go over what I did. I went back to the browser, and in the URL, this is my organization ID, and that's what I'm using in Postman. So back in Postman, I changed the method to post, and then I set the org ID to what I just copied. And then we have the flux query in here. And in our headers, we make sure that our content type is application/vnd.flux. And then we can go ahead and send our query. And now we have our result set, and we can have our result set. We see that it's comma separated. The first row gives us the column headers, and then the subsequent rows give us the values. And that's it. We've made an API call to retrieve data from InfluxDB. Now we can also write data by using the write endpoint here instead of the query endpoint. Okay, that's it for now. Let's see. Okay, that's it for now. Let's install the Mosquito MQTT broker. Let's start with our terminal and let's SSH into our Ubuntu server. Once we're in there, let's use apt install as the super user. You can ignore this part, it's not part of the install. Okay, installation is done. Next, let's install, again, a super user. Let's install the Mosquito clients. Okay, once this is done, we need to stop and start. So we'll use systemctl stop the service, and then we'll start the service. And that's it. Now we're ready to install the Telegraph agent. While we're still logged onto the server, we need to open up our browser, so I'll just switch screens and pull up our browser. I'll get a new tab and I'll browse to portal.influxdata.com/downloads. Next, we need to go to the Telegraph section. That's this. And I'll choose the version for Debian and Ubuntu. So what we need to do is just copy all of this and then go back to the terminal. Okay, we're done. We can then go back to our browser and let's log back into InfluxDB. So we need to go to the Telegraph section. I'll just log in once again. Okay, log in. Okay, so let's go to the Telegraph section and let's create a new configuration. So for our bucket, we'll choose Noah, and let's filter for MQTT. Let's continue configuring. Okay, we can go ahead and save and test. And then we can copy out our tokens. So we'll just copy this out and go back to our terminal that we're still logged into. That's this. We'll paste that in. So that sets an environment variable. And let's come back here. And let's copy this. Let's go back to the terminal. And that's it. We have our Telegraph client running. I will save these same way I saved the first token. And that's it. We're done. So we can click finish. And we have an MQTT consumer, which we can use later on.